Welcome to the world of science fiction stories, and don't forget to like, share and subscribe my channel. Enjoy the listening. Alien professor gives students a week's work assignment, but human finishes in 5 minutes. The examination hall of the Galactic Academy was a vast dome chamber, its ceiling an artificial night sky filled with swirling nebulae in distant constellations. The air carried a crisp, almost sterile scent, the product of carefully regulated atmospheric conditions tailored to accommodate the diverse array of species present. The room hummed with a low, pulsing vibration, a subtle effect of the Academy's advanced technology ensuring that every student, regardless of biological origin, could exist comfortably within the same environment. Cadet Stanley Becker sat in the third row, his posture relaxed but his mind alert. He was the only human among the 100 or so students gathered for the final exam in advanced astrogation, a subject so complex that even the most brilliant species of the known galaxy struggled to master it. The other cadets, representing a multitude of intelligent civilizations, were a collection of reptilian beings with elongated skulls, feathered avian-like creatures with keen predatory gazes, and silicon-based life forms whose crystalline bodies refracted the light in shifting patterns. Their presence was a testament to the Academy's commitment to gathering the finest minds from across the stars. At the front of the hall stood Professor Zeeler, a towering figure of rigid exoskeletal plating and 4 dexterous arms. His deep, resonant voice carried an unmistakable note of authority, reinforced by the quiet clicking of his mandibles as he surveyed the assembled students. His species, the Vil, were known for their unparalleled analytical prowess and an almost fanatical dedication to logic. Zillner's reputation was infamous within the Academy. He had broken more students than any other instructor, his exams so notoriously difficult that even passing with the bare minimum was considered a mark of honor. Now, as the final exam was about to begin, an expectant hush fell over the chamber. The students sat rigidly in their seats, their focus absolute. Some activated their neural interfaces, tiny biotechnological implants that allowed direct interaction with data streams. Others extended secondary appendages, preparing to manipulate complex holographic formulas. Every cadet knew that this test would determine their fate. Zeeler raised one of his arms, and the air shimmered as hundreds of holographic displays materialized in front of each student. The glowing equations, rotating star charts, and gravitational computations reflected in their wide, blinking eyes. The problem was presented in multiple dimensions, requiring the students to solve an intricate navigational challenge that simulated piloting a vessel through an unstable sector of space, a region where black holes, pulsar winds, and quantum anomalies rendered traditional calculations useless. This was not just a test of memorization or technical skill. It was a challenge designed to break the weak and prove who among them was truly capable of commanding a starship. You have 7 planetary cycles to complete this examination, Zeeler intoned, his voice devoid of emotion. Begin. Stanley exhaled slowly and leaned back in his chair. He glanced at the glowing display in front of him, skimming through the problem with mild curiosity. He had been dreading this exam, not because he thought it would be difficult, but because he knew exactly how it was designed. The problem was convoluted on purpose, meant to overwhelm with unnecessary complexity. He had seen this kind of over-engineering before, mathematical arrogance wrapped in layers of equations that only served to obscure a simple truth. Stanley had grown up in a family of astrophysicists, spending his childhood listening to orbital mechanics explained over dinner. The moment he saw the exam, he recognized the core pattern hidden beneath the extraneous calculations. It was nothing more than a basic navigational problem that had been dressed up to appear intimidating. Around him, the other cadets were already deep into their calculations. Some were cross-referencing vast databases of astrogational theory, while others frantically sketched out 3-dimensional trajectories in glowing mid-air projections. The crystalline students emitted subtle vibrations, their internal processors working at full capacity. A reptilian cadet beside Stanley flicked his forked tongue in frustration, his clawed fingers darting over the holographic interface as he tried to stabilize the simulated spacecraft's trajectory. Stanley, meanwhile, pulled out an old-fashioned pen and a small notepad. This earned him more than a few puzzled glances from his peers. While they relied on cutting-edge computational systems, he preferred the simplicity of manual calculations. It wasn't that he distrusted technology, he simply found that writing things out helped him think more clearly. He set to work quickly, simplifying the problem in his head. The key was recognizing that the entire exam was based on a flawed assumption, that conventional three-dimensional astrogation was required for a region of space where relativistic effects dominated. But if he shifted the perspective to a non-Euclidean frame, the calculations collapsed into a far more manageable form. Stanley scratched down a few numbers, ran a quick mental check, and within minutes, he had his answer. Silence fell over his immediate vicinity as he stood up, stretched slightly, and walked toward the front of the room. The sound of his footsteps echoed unnaturally in the otherwise focused quiet. Every cadet was still deeply engrossed in their work, oblivious to his movements, except for Zeeler, whose 3 black eyes locked onto him the moment he approached the desk. The professor's mandibles twitched in what could have been confusion or irritation. Stanley placed the completed answer sheet on Zeeler's desk with a casual shrug. "I'm done," he said simply. For a moment, there was no response. Zeeler's elongated fingers hesitated over the answer sheet, as if unwilling to accept what he had just heard. The notion was preposterous. No one could have finished in so little time. "You cannot be finished," Zeeler said at last, his voice slow, measured. His secondary hands tapped against the desk in a restless rhythm. "You are mocking this exam. Return to your seat and complete the work properly." Stanley remained unfazed. "No, sir. It's done." The words hung in the air like a challenge. By now, the disturbance had begun to ripple outward. A few cadets nearby, sensing something unusual, paused their calculations to glance toward the front. A low electronic hum emanated from one of the silicon-based students, a sign of confusion. The reptilian cadet beside Stanley flicked his tongue again, his slitted eyes narrowing in suspicion. Zeeler, moving with the deliberate precision of a scholar who had seen every trick in the book, lifted the answer sheet and slid it into the verification system. A holographic panel flickered to life above the desk, scanning through Stanley's calculations. The professor expected an immediate rejection, a cascade of red warnings signaling incorrect formulas. Instead, the system processed the data, ran a full analysis, and then displayed the final verdict, 100% accurate. The moment stretched impossibly long. The murmurs began almost immediately, students shifting in their seats, whispers darting between them like sparks across a circuit board. A professor in the observation chamber above activated his communicator, summoning higher-ranking officials. Zeeler's grip tightened on the desk. He was not a being prone to emotional outbursts, but this defied all reason. "Explain," he demanded, his voice now tinged with something dangerously close to disbelief. "How did you?" Stanley just smiled. "It's just math, Professor." And with that, the first shock wave of what would soon become a galaxy-wide academic scandal was set in motion. Professor Zeeler's 3 eyes remained fixed on the glowing green confirmation of Stanley Becker's perfect score, his exoskeletal fingers twitching slightly as he reread the verification message, half expecting the system to correct itself and reveal some mistake. Yet the result remained unchanged, 100% accurate. The murmur spreading through the room grew louder, a rising tide of disbelief and confusion. The other students had paused their work entirely, their holographic equations flickering mid-calculation. A few had turned in their seats, craning their necks to get a better look at Stanley, who remained standing in front of the professor's desk with a relaxed posture. A sharp chime rang through the hall, a system alert reserved for moments of extreme academic irregularity. Almost immediately, the observation window above the room flickered with new activity. Academy instructors and senior professors, alerted by the anomaly, peered down with interest. The air itself seemed to tighten, the weight of attention pressing onto every cadet. Zeeler finally moved, his tall, segmented frame shifting with deliberate precision. He lifted the answer sheet again, this time inspecting it manually, as if his own eyes would uncover a flaw the verification system had somehow missed. "Explain," he commanded, his deep voice carrying across the now silent hall. Stanley folded his arms. It wasn't that complicated. The statement was almost casual, but in the charged atmosphere of the examination hall, it might as well have been a thunderclap. A silicon-based student let out a low vibrational hum, a sign of disbelief. A reptilian cadet in the second row clicked his jaw in irritation. "Not complicated?" Zeller echoed, his voice as rigid as his exoskeleton, his mandibles twitching slightly before he continued. "This examination is based on the most advanced principles of astrogation known to the Galactic Academy. Every equation, every variable has been meticulously refined over centuries, and yet you claim it was not complicated?" Stanley gave a small shrug. "The problem was over-engineered, too many unnecessary variables. Once I stripped it down, the solution was obvious." Zeller's upper set of hands clasped behind his back, a calculated gesture of restraint. His lower hands tapped at his console, pulling up Stanley's solution on the central holographic display so the entire hall could see. The equations, stripped of their complexity, unfolded before the audience. The students leaned forward, their eyes darting between the simplified notation and the original problem set. Slowly, understanding dawned across the room. An avian-like cadet with sharp golden feathers let out a sharp exhalation. "It actually makes sense," he muttered, half to himself. He bypassed the relativistic calculations by. "But that contradicts every model we've been taught," another voice protested from the back of the room. "How can something this simple work?" The murmur grew into outright discussion, but Zeller raised a hand, instantly silencing the students. His gaze returned to Stanley, unreadable. "You are implying," Zeller said slowly, "that our academy's methodologies are flawed." Stanley hesitated. He had expected disbelief. He had expected questions. But he had not anticipated the sheer weight of the accusation now being leveled at him. The Galactic Academy was the most prestigious institution in the known universe, its teachings the foundation of interstellar navigation across countless civilizations. Suggesting that their methodologies were outdated was not just bold, it was heretical. Still, he had already crossed the line. There was no point in backing down now. "I'm saying," Stanley said carefully, "that this particular method is inefficient. It doesn't mean everything the Academy teaches is wrong, just that there might be a better way to approach certain problems." Zeller exhaled, a low clicking sound that echoed through the chamber. "You are aware of what you are suggesting?" Stanley nodded. "I am." For a long moment, there was silence. Then Zeller turned sharply, his movements precise as he tapped a command into his desk console. The main display flickered again, this time summoning an external communication link. A moment later, a deep, resonant voice filled the hall. "Professor Zeller," the voice said, calm yet commanding. "Explain this disturbance." Every cadet in the room froze. The holographic display above the professor's desk now showed the stern face of the Galactic Academy's head chancellor. His features were severe, his dark eyes piercing through the transmission as if he could see into every corner of the examination hall. The weight of his presence was palpable. Zeller inclined his head slightly, a formal gesture of respect. "Chancellor, we have encountered an anomaly during the astrogation examination. A human cadet has submitted a fully accurate solution in under 5 minutes." The Chancellor's eyes narrowed fractionally. "That is not possible." Zeller remained still. "The verification system has confirmed his solution." A brief pause. The Chancellor's gaze shifted, locking onto Stanley. "Cadet Becker," he said, his voice measured. "Step forward." Stanley felt the tension in the room deepen as he moved closer to the display. Every eye remained fixed on him, watching his every movement. The Chancellor studied him for a long moment before speaking again. "You claim to have solved the problem in under 5 minutes. Yes, sir, Stanley replied. And you believe the methodology taught by the Academy is flawed? Stanley exhaled. I believe there's a more efficient way to approach certain calculations, yes. Another silence. Then the Chancellor's gaze shifted back to Zeeler. Professor, he said, send me the full analysis of the cadet solution. This matter is no longer confined to a single examination hall. Zeeler inclined his head again. Understood, Chancellor. The transmission ended. For the first time in his career, Professor Zill felt the weight of something far greater than an academic dispute settle over him. This was no longer about a single exam. This was about the foundation of everything the Galactic Academy had built. Stanley stood in the now silent examination hall, his pulse steady despite the weight of 100 eyes on him. The transmission with the Chancellor had ended, but its impact still lingered thick in the air like static before a storm. The other cadets, who had spent years memorizing formulas and perfecting their calculations under the Academy's strict methodologies, watched him with expressions ranging from disbelief to resentment. Professor Zeeler remained behind his desk, his exoskeletal fingers tapping against the smooth surface as he processed the implications of what had just transpired. His reputation, his teachings, his authority, all had been placed under scrutiny because of one human's unexpected answer. The sound of a door sliding open at the far end of the hall snapped the tension like a taut wire suddenly cut. 3 instructors entered, their dark robes marking them as members of the academic board. Their movements were swift, deliberate, and their gazes locked onto Zeeler the moment they stepped inside. Professor, the first instructor, an avian-like woman with sleek obsidian feathers, spoke first. The Chancellor has summoned you. Zeeler inclined his head in understanding but did not move immediately. Instead, his 3 eyes shifted back to Stanley. Cadet Becker, he said, his voice even but carrying a weight of authority. You will accompany me. A flicker of unease passed through the hall. The other students stiffened slightly, their postures rigid with anticipation. Being summoned by the Chancellor was not a routine occurrence, it was an event of magnitude. Stanley, however, nodded without hesitation. Understood. Without another word, Zeeler turned and exited through the same doors the instructors had entered. Stanley followed closely behind, his steps firm but unhurried. The corridor outside was a vast stretch of polished metal and glowing blue navigation strips lining the walls. The architecture of the Academy was sleek, functional, designed to reflect the institution's relentless pursuit of knowledge. They walked in silence, their footsteps the only sound against the smooth flooring. Zeeler led him through a series of passageways, past students and faculty who turned their heads at the sight of them. Word had spread fast, too fast. Stanley could feel the weight of their stares, not of curiosity but of something sharper, doubt, resentment. He was the anomaly in an institution built on rigid tradition, and that alone made him dangerous. Finally, they reached the upper administrative level, where towering doors led to the Chancellor's private chamber. The guards at the entrance stepped aside without question, allowing them entry. The room was vast yet deliberately minimalistic. A panoramic window stretched across one side, offering a breathtaking view of the binary stars orbiting in the distance. The lighting was subdued, casting long shadows against the polished floor. In the center of the chamber, seated behind a sleek metallic desk, was the Chancellor. His presence was commanding, not through size or physicality but through an aura of absolute control. His piercing gaze met Stanley's the moment he entered, assessing him with quiet intensity. Zeeler came to a halt and straightened his posture. Chancellor, he said, I have brought the cadet as requested. The Chancellor nodded slowly, his fingers steepled together. His expression remained unreadable. Cadet Becker, he said at last. You are aware of the implications of your actions? Stanley kept his voice level. Yes, sir. The Chancellor studied him for a long moment before gesturing toward the large display behind him. The holographic screen came to life, revealing a series of data streams, Stanley's calculations cross-referenced against the Academy's standard methodology. At a glance, the difference was staggering. Your solution has forced us to reconsider a foundational principle of our astrogation system, the Chancellor continued. Our models have remained unchanged for centuries, yet your approach suggests an alternative framework that is both simpler and more efficient. Stanley remained silent, sensing there was more to come. The Chancellor leaned forward slightly. Do you understand what that means? Stanley chose his words carefully. It means that there's room for improvement. A faint smile touched the Chancellor's lips, though it never reached his eyes. That is an understatement, Cadet. If your calculations hold, it would mean that the Galactic Academy, the institution that dictates navigational protocols across multiple civilizations, has been teaching an outdated method for generations. The repercussions of such a revelation would be substantial. Zeeler's expression remained unreadable, but Stanley could sense the tension in the professor's stance. This was not just about one exam, this was about the Academy's credibility, its legacy, and the power it held over the intellectual foundations of interstellar travel. The Chancellor exhaled slowly. We have already begun conducting a secondary verification of your calculations. If they prove accurate under independent review, we will have no choice but to address this matter on a wider scale. However, he paused, his gaze sharpening, that is a dangerous path. Stanley's jaw tightened. Dangerous how? The Chancellor's gaze did not waver. There are those within the Academy and beyond who will resist any suggestion that our methodologies are flawed. If your calculations prove correct, you will have undermined an institution that has dictated galactic navigation for centuries. That will make you a target. The weight of those words settled over the room. Stanley had expected resistance, but the warning carried an edge he had not fully considered. He was not just challenging a test, he was challenging a system that had been meticulously upheld by some of the most powerful minds in the galaxy. The Chancellor leaned back in his chair. I am placing you under direct academic review. You will work with a specialized team to replicate and expand upon your findings. Until then, you are not to discuss this matter with anyone outside of the review team. Is that clear? Stanley nodded. Yes, sir. The Chancellor's expression remained impassive. Good. Professor Zeeler will oversee your participation in the review process. You are dismissed. Zeeler gave a respectful nod before turning to leave. Stanley followed, his mind already racing with the implications of what had just been said. As they stepped out of the chamber, the doors sliding shut behind them, Zeeler finally spoke. You have set something into motion, Cadet Becker, he said, his voice quiet yet firm. I do not know if you realize the full extent of it yet. Stanley met his gaze. I understand enough. Zeeler's mandibles twitched slightly, the closest thing to a smirk Stanley had ever seen from him. Then I suggest you prepare yourself, Zeeler said, because the Academy will not let this go unchallenged. With that, they walked in silence, leaving the Chancellor's chamber behind. The path ahead had been set, but Stanley knew one thing with certainty, this was only the beginning. The walk back from the Chancellor's chamber was long, the silence between Stanley and Professor Zeeler stretching like an invisible tension wire. The corridors of the Galactic Academy, once a maze of sterile efficiency, now seemed lined with unseen eyes. The news had spread beyond the examination hall, whispers slithered through the air, filling every corner of the towering institution with speculation. Stanley kept his posture straight, his steps even, but he could feel the undercurrent shifting around him. He had disturbed something larger than an academic tradition. The realization had settled deep in his bones. When they arrived at the professor's private research wing, the heavy doors slid open, revealing a vast, dimly lit laboratory lined with holographic projections and complex stellar charts. The moment the door sealed shut behind them, Zeeler turned sharply. You understand the weight of what has begun? Zeeler said, his mandibles clicking in measured deliberation. Stanley nodded. I do. Then you also understand that this will not remain an academic discussion. Zeller moved toward a central control console, his exoskeletal fingers tapping across illuminated keys. A large projection flickered into existence, an intricate display of the Academy's official astrogation models compared against Stanley's simplified equation. These are the simulations currently being run by the verification board, Zeller continued, his tone devoid of unnecessary embellishments. They are testing your solution across multiple gravitational environments. Thus far, every model has produced results in your favor. Stanley stepped closer, watching as the holographic display pulsed with confirmation readings. He had known his calculations were correct, but seeing them verified in real time against the very system that had sought to disprove them sent a wave of satisfaction through him. Zeller observed him for a long moment before speaking again. You will now be placed under direct scrutiny. That means you will not only have to defend your findings but also withstand the weight of opposition from those who refuse to see reason. Stanley exhaled. Let me guess, there are those who have built their entire careers on the Academy's existing models. Zeller's 3 eyes darkened. Careers, reputations, power. You did not just present a new formula, Cadet Becker. You introduced doubt into a structure that has governed interstellar navigation for centuries.